Alright, Dons, welcome to the lecture on Chapter 10, Section 1. Today we're going to talk about the divisive politics of slavery. And the objective for this lesson is to understand the rise of sectionalism in the 1850s. And we will talk about how the Compromise of 1850 was trying to end the crisis of slavery. One thing to keep in mind, the Civil War is going to break out in 1861. This lecture, or I should say, this chapter is primarily going to focus on the 10-year period prior to the outbreak of war and talk about all the different events that built upon each other that led to sectionalism in the United States of America.
Okay, so things we've kind of already talked about a lot, kind of not to beat a dead horse, but is the difference in economies between the North and the South, right? The South is the slave-based, plantation-based, one-crop agriculture and cotton, right? Exporting cotton, right? And the North is going to have a rising industrial sector, right? Lots of industry, manufacturing, based in textiles, but starting to branch out to other products and goods, as we saw in Chapter 9. And we're also going to see mass immigration, mostly German and Irish, to the North, and specifically northern cities.
And this will play a large role. This drastic increase in population will give the North a huge amount of power, not only through industry and job opportunities and job growth, but also in politics. And as we see at the outbreak of the war, one of the reasons the South decided to secede and break away was because there were so many people in the North, they had become a political minority and pretty much lost all of their political power, especially with regards to presidential elections. So, as we talked about in 9.3 and 9.4, the Texas Revolution and the war with Mexico, the United States of America gained a huge amount of territory after the Mexican-American War. Now, we discussed how Polk probably instigated the war for a land grab. It was most likely due to selfish reasons, and the North knew it. The North thought he was quite transparent in his claims, and the North wanted to make sure that this land would not become slave land. And whenever a president asks Congress for a declaration of war, he as commander-in-chief can execute the war, but in order to execute any war properly, you need money. And in order to get that money, you need Congress to give you money. So David Wilmot, a Democrat, Northern Democrat from Pennsylvania, at the outbreak of the Mexican-American War, basically proposed a bill that said whatever money we're going to give to fight this war cannot be used to gain land that will then be used for slavery. So any land gained in this war cannot have African Americans. And by saying African Americans, he was clearly tying the race of the people to the institution of slavery, which is also very important.
Right. And you can see this Wilmot Proviso actually is passed by the House of Representatives twice and shut down by the Senate. So you can see that the South is losing that political power. They've lost the political majority in the House of Representatives. So what becomes very important to them is the balance in the Senate, right? Each state gets 2 senators. So the southern states are going to start caring very much about the Senate because it's the last place they can really hold on to political power. And after the Mexican-American War, when California applies to be a free state, that balance in the Senate is really at risk.
And that balance is so crucial to the South. So, in order for California to be admitted as a free state, one would have to assume the South would gain quite a bit in the deal. But the question you might be asking yourself is, well, if California goes through this invisible 3630 line that was established by the Missouri Compromise, why is it a free state? Why isn't it a slave state? Half of California is below the line, half is above. Now, as we learned in 9.4, in 1849 there was a huge rush of population to California. The population skyrocketed, they skipped the territorial stage and went straight for statehood. And what that allowed them to do is apply immediately with people who were very transient, people who could get up and move to California right away. Well, people who own slaves, have large plantations, have a lot of possessions, slaves, other things, it takes them a lot longer to get to California. So huge majority of the people in California were not favored slavery. They were not farmers, so California naturally applied as a free state.
Okay, and this is going to lead us to the Compromise of 1850, which is going to be handled basically by Henry Clay. He's going to come up with it. He's going to die before that he can get it passed, and Stephen A. Douglas.
Killer compromise.
Yeah. Stephen A. Douglas is going to end up getting it all passed through the Senate, right? And basically, it's a way to get California into the Union, right? It gives the South a very strict and very hard fugitive slave act, which means northern states are going to have to return and actively try to catch runaway slaves in the north, which most northerners aren't too excited about. Right? It's going to make Texas give up some of its land and give it Texas money to pay off its debts for the War with Mexico, and it's going to open the new territories, the Utah Territory and the New Mexico Territory, to slavery through the idea of popular sovereignty, or the belief that the people that live there will vote, and whatever they want will be whether the state or territory will become a slave or a free state.
So popular sovereignty is really important, and the great thing about popular sovereignty, if you're the politician proposing it, is you're not really making anyone happy, but you're not making anyone very angry either. It's a genius way to sort of straddle the fence of the slavery line and not have to take a position. Now, this becomes extremely important because in 10.2, Mr. Manelsky and I will talk about how this idea of popular sovereignty carries over into Kansas and Nebraska and ends up really blowing up in Stephen A. Douglas's face when it doesn't work out as well as he thought. But one really important thing to keep in mind here is that the North, the one big thing they gained from this was obviously the huge free state of California. So the South had to gain something great. So we talked about Texas and popular sovereignty and getting rid of the slave trade in Washington, D.C. But the biggest and most controversial was the Fugitive Slave Act. Now, the Fugitive Slave Act demanded that Northerners, a commoner, a law enforcement agent, government worker, anyone, would have to report any escaped slave in the North, basically turn them in, and then that slave would be taken back down south, and he or she would be determined whether or not they escaped, and then put back and sold back into slavery. What this does is this creates a real dilemma for Northerners. Should they follow the law that's demanding they turn these people in, or should they do what they think is morally right and turn a blind eye to this, knowing that they could be condemning someone to a life of slavery in the process?
And we're going to talk a lot more about the Fugitive Slave Act in 10.2 and kind of the effects of it. Right? If you have any other questions, make sure to ask one of your history teachers. Hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks, guys.